Yeah, I deleted social media like 3 or 4 years ago.
It's
probably one of the better decisions I've ever made, truthfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's if not consumed or engaged with in a healthy way, it could be detrimental.
Yeah, and I feel like it's sort of designed to kind of fuck you over in that regard. Like there is no healthy way.
Did you see that documentary on Netflix about that? I forget what it was
Experiment, called. I think.
Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, maybe I'm off.
But it was talking about the dangers of social media, essentially.
Yeah.
And how it is designed.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it.
Oh, for sure.
100%. I can't tell you how many times I'm talking about something and then it's in my feed. And I'm like, that used to be such a what the fuck moment. And now that's like, oh, yep, there it is. Yep. There's the algorithm. Kind of bugs me, man. It bothers me how complacent we've gotten with all of that. Yeah. You know?
Well, I think it speaks to like how powerless we are. It's like, what am I going to do?
Right.
Like, how am I going to change this ginormous problem in the world?
By design, maybe, you know? Like, that's fucking terrifying to me.
So I don't blame you for going off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think at some point, it just didn't fit anymore for me in my life. With what I wanted to do. And it was a constant, I mean, I had, Facebook, and then I had Instagram, and I think at one point Snapchat, and it was just like, you get tired of one, you shift over to the next, get tired of that one, you shift over to the next. And it was just like this constant, I don't know, man, comparison, and lurking and like, what are they up to? And
for sure.
Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
It was such a strange realization.
Yeah. I think I've gone on a couple hiatuses from it, and they were super beneficial. They were, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a cleanse, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed him, and I don't know why I came back, but I did. But I think I'm pretty intentional about how I use it, though.
Yeah.
I think if you're not, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like I am definitely wired for addiction, for sure. And so that comes out and bleeds into other aspects of my life. So it's something I have to watch very carefully,
Yeah.
I've always said that I can't control these things on a micro level. I have to control them on a macro level. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like the analogy, I was just talking to somebody today. If I have chips in the house and they're sitting, or a box of Twinkies, if I'm being honest, like Twinkies are just my kryptonite.
That's the go-to. Okay.
If I have that sitting in my house, I know I will eat them. And so I cannot manage it on that level. But if I abstain, right? And I can do that relatively easy. It's very odd,
Interesting.
Yeah.
But once you open the door, it's wide open.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's usually open until I reach a level of dysfunction and disgust with myself.
Okay.
If I'm being totally honest, where I'm like,
that makes sense.
It's like that werewolf moment where you see yourself in the mirror and you're just like, oh shit.
We're so alike in that way.
Really?
Oh yeah. I can't really keep peanut butter in the house for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. It reaches that point where it's just, I need to get my shit together. Oh, I love peanut butter.
So you're just spooning it out, eating it.
If I need to, yeah. Yeah. if I don't have Reese's in the house.
Oh, Reese's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reese's.
Yeah.
Are you a cups guy or are you a pieces guy?
Any shape. It doesn't matter. Reese's is my kryptonite for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm really not so much of a sweets guy. I mean, the Twinkies do it for me, but it's weird. Mostly where I find my addictive qualities coming out is work.
Really?
In an odd way.
In what way?
I will bring work home.
Okay.
I will ruminate. I will do case conceptualization by myself. I know I'm a loser, man. It's like I become obsessed. There's no there's no middle ground. It's on or off for me. And I think that kind of explains the macro, micro level. It's on or off.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it being off. I just have a very hard time modulating that switch, man.
Are you actively working or are you just ruminating about it?
It depends. I think, when I first got into my role as a counselor, I was definitely actively working, bringing work home, and having that spilling over into my quality time, into my self-care, you know what I mean? Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But I go the other way too, with the ruminating on things and not necessarily working on it, but thinking about it, hyper fixated on things at times. So, yeah.
Well, we already got sidetracked because I already wanted to ask you a first question.
Sure.
But knowing us, a topic comes up and we just run with it.
It's all good, man. Yeah. It's all good.
I wanted to ask more about your story and more about what are your guy problems?
Yeah. Where do I start? I mean, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Man.
I mean, you could jump off of what you've already kind of shared about bringing work home, addiction.
Sure.
Like, where did those things stem from?
Yeah, I feel like I could start that in so many places, but the best place I feel like is that as long as I can remember, when I was a kid, there was this sort of void in me, a void that I really could not ever put my finger on and get specific about what it was that was missing, but something was missing, man. And it was like a hole, like literally a black hole in my chest that would I needed something to fill that void at all times. And I know a large part of that came from a very traumatic childhood, a lot of verbal and physical abuse. Horrendous stories that I won't get into for obvious reasons, but
you can.
Yeah, I think
if you're up for it.
I think it would take a lot longer.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Than we've
already discussed.
Yeah,
some, but
just a lot of very gritty, physically abusive, shaming. I, like you, sensitive young little guy, man, and I had no place where I could be myself. Never. Yeah. It was never a thing. I could never be who I was. Who I was not okay. And so I began at a very early age kind of piecing together this person that I thought that I needed to be, right? And this was handed to me. This was almost explicitly told to me on a daily basis that I was worthless, that I was useless. And so, no doubt about it, this is the origin story of that void, never truly feeling okay in my own skin, never feeling valid or safe, And so this process began where I was constantly searching, constantly running from that pain, really, and worked for several years, more than a decade, in an industry that I had seen my abusive caretaker work in. And, it's so funny because only in retrospect, have I been able to kind of piece this together and realized how much of my life was really trying to erase myself and create a version of him that would have been acceptable, right? And down to like very specific details, but this career field that I had gotten into in the petrochemical industry, and really forced myself into this square hole, and just deeply misaligned, man. Deeply misaligned and lost and no hope. And so my hope came from substance. It came from women. It came from expensive things and cars and houses and running, really, trying to plug that hole. And at some point, I think I was really stubborn, truth be told, because I ran till I was in my mid-30s before it finally got to a point where my dysfunction had reached a level where it was starting to kind of leak through the cracks, and where people were starting to notice. I was divorced twice by the time I was 35, my life was just crumbling. It was finally started to crumble. I was always proud that I was an addict who on the surface kind of held it together. I looked great on paper. I bought a house before I was 30. And like I said, always had expensive things. Always that part of life was always so nailed down. Had this job where I was making crazy money, and had gotten this, promotion into this high profile investigator role. And I was really doing, I think, I was operating at the peak of what I was capable of in that paradigm, right? And one day I realized that I could not do this anymore. And it was almost as black and white and as simplistic as that, that on and off switch.
Yeah.
It had gotten flipped to off. And I started having panic attacks at work. And I would go into a secluded space and I would call my wife, and I was shaking, and I was, just terrified of what? Everything. The world was not a safe place for me, and I couldn't hide that fear any longer. And I walked away one day. I walked away from it all. And what followed was a period of acute destruction, is the best way that I can describe it. An incendiary just destruction of everything that I had worked for. And I quit my job. I walked away, and essentially gave everything over to my wife and said, I can't do this anymore. You're going to have to do it. I can't do this. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. Feeling the shame of having just started a bonfire to my life's work, and being absolutely like a child. There was this moment of clarity, and I still really have a hard time articulating what it was that I saw, but I think what it was needed to be seen. And in order for that to be seen, everything about me that I had built had to be stripped to nothing. And that's what happened. And in that space, in that nothingness, I saw that on some level I was fundamentally worthy of love. I was fundamentally untouchable in that space. When all of that armor, when all of that work, when all of those accolades and accomplishments were stripped away, that on some level I was untouchable. And that created an almost manic high in my brain. In fact, everybody that knew me was like, dude, what's going on? I had just gone from quitting my job, this 6-figure position that I had worked my entire life for, walking away from everything, and was just high on life. Absolutely high on life, man. And it was the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced. And it created this fascination, this inner sort of trajectory that I had no control over. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea what I was going to do. And just through serendipity, through happenstance, I don't know. But I took a position as like a frontline care staff worker in a mental health facility. And the journey of fixing my shit, facing my pain for the first time in my life started. And it just built on this cascading sort of snowball effect where I saw, not only am I okay, but I can fucking do this, man. I can fix myself, you know? I hate to use that terminology, but my brain is plastic. I can work these kinks out. I can find my pinch points. I can walk into a room. I can look people in the eyes. And it was such a taste of freedom that it was just, I couldn't extinguish this. I couldn't. And it wasn't, in a weird way, it was no doing of my own. It was like life was finally free to fill the volume of this meat suit in the way that it wanted to, you know?
Yeah.
And it was like, boom. And it was one thing after another, you know? And I got into therapy and again, this fascination, like I could show this to other people, you know? It was incredible, man. It was incredible. So that's my story in a nutshell, you know?
Wow. I'm speechless.
Yeah.
Because I knew a lot of that, but the way that you just articulated it, it felt profound. It felt very relatable to my story. Like I understand so much of what you experienced in my own experiences. And it's a sad beginning. And it's like, I feel for that little boy, you know, that was told those awful things, like being worthless.
Yeah.
And then I understand that void of like trying to fill that with other things and trying to just feel good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And wow, I'm so curious as to, it was like a day for you where it just like snapped out of it. And I hate that term, snapped out of it. But, but like, tell me about that day. I'm just so curious how that day went.
Yeah. I mean, there were a number of things. I think to narrow it down to a day would be dishonest.
Okay.
You know, this was, well, if I'm really being honest about this was something that had started a long time before. It was like, I see my pain now. I see this drive to drink as this calling, this beckoning to real life from the beginning, right? Calling me to face my pain, calling me, face this.
Okay.
Face this.
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah.
And like the story of Jonah and the whale, it was like I denied my calling for so many years. Unacceptable. No, absolutely not. And I leveraged myself so that I couldn't escape for a long time. You know, I was married to this job. Everything about me was this job, my entire identity.
Yeah.
But I think in that, it was like this terminal sort of structure, you know, that could not be sustained. And because all of my identity was in that role, when it came down, it all went. It all had to fucking go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it was this process, I think, that came online through a number of different variables, through a number of different, I don't know, things that I was working through at the time. But that realization was so, I, you know, in grad school, I had to write a letter of admission, whatever it is. And I described it as the event horizon, you know, because that's really what it was. There was this threshold that I crossed, and I still, again, I have a hard time articulating what it was that happened to me. But I crossed this threshold that I realized on some level I had taken a step onto the other side into a new paradigm that I would never, ever be able to return to this old paradigm. And the thought of that, experiencing that, was so freeing. Like I said, I was high, and I'm talking like spiritually high for like 6 months. My mom was getting scared. I remember all of the sudden, none of my life fit anymore. It was like I had grown 3 sizes and none of my clothes fit anymore.
Yeah.
None of my friends were aligned with me anymore. And it was a tremendously beautiful process, but also a horrifically destructive process. The process of spiritual awakening, this thing that I had been putting off my whole life. And there it was. And I couldn't go back. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, after those 6 months, what brought you back to a more even keel place? How did the high end?
Yeah. I think that I was sort of in this kind of, in recovery, there's this idea of pink cloud. They call it the pink cloud, where you are surfing this sort of high, which is, I think, the taste of freedom, the first taste of freedom, and the first taste of hope really is what it boils down to. And you are sort of allowed, if I can use that word, to stay there for a little bit. It's comfortable and it's safe. And it's the first time you've ever felt safe forever, in forever. And I think that for a while I was okay. And then slowly this process of, amazement started to kind of settle, consolidate. And I was able to see that there was a shitload of work to do,
Okay.
And that's when I think the process sort of stabilized. And again, I know it sounds wild, but to this day, I don't think that my ego is the one pushing this. I feel like life is pushing this. Life is doing what it wants to do. If I was to pour this water down these plants, the water would go where it wants to go. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I feel like we as energetic beings, not to go too woo-woo on you, but I feel like we are biologically wired with, I would assume some of our passions, most maybe of our abilities, our innate abilities, right? Our likes and our dislikes and stuff. And I'm sure a lot, it's nature versus nurture, but my sensitivity as a child, I had no choice in the matter. Life wanted to do that. That was life's expression of Adam, right? And from the beginning, it was no. That's not okay. That's not good enough, right? And that's to be shunned and to be ashamed of and to hide, things like writing. I was always a writer and I always hid it. I hid it. I was in drama in high school and I never told anybody about that, None of my friends were in drama with me. And it was always this sort of hidden part of me that I was just so ashamed of. But back to my water flowing analogy, this was what life wanted to do. I had no choice in the matter. I don't like mayonnaise. I have no choice whether or not I like mayonnaise. I just don't like it, And so this process just sort of, I think, is doing its thing. It's coming online. And the most applicable, the most, I would say, accommodating profession for me at this point in my life. And I do say this point because the minute I take identity in this and I put stock in this and start to build my foundation, it's usually when life gives me a solid bitch slap and shows me that I don't know anything and that I need to let go and allow this process to continually unfold. But that's where I landed in this helping profession in mental health, because I think the process to me was so fascinating retrospectively watching this thing unfold. and not being able to share it with very many people, you know,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just letting go of that control.
Yeah.
Letting go of that control and letting life take you where it wants to.
Right.
I think that's, man, so much of that is wrapped up in humans, our need for control, our need for our fear of uncertainty.
Sure.
And just trying to control narratives. And the second you let go, there's fear in that. But if you choose to look at it the other way, there's freedom in that.
Oh, man. Yeah. Freedom like you've never tasted.
Yeah.
You know?
How do you fill the void now? Is there a void now? Is that freedom enough to fill what was previously a void?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So that void, or the wiring of my brain in this old schematic, is still there. It's very much still there, and I see it come out. The rewards aren't there anymore for me, you know? And the deeper into this process that I get, it's almost the more it becomes like just absolutely without substance to me, you know. Drinking fell away. It was the first thing to fall away. And I really thank God for that, because that was an obsession in my life, you know. And you talk to any real alcoholic, you know, as opposed to a fake alcoholic, you talk to anybody who's really struggled with addiction, and it's like this obsession with substance is always just right there, just knocking at the door. And when that fell away, I think that was, by and large, probably the most functionality that returned back online. But to go back to your question, I think it was like the wiring was still there. The patterns of behavior were still there. The selfishness was still there. It was like I saw through the illusion of ever getting anything from it again. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And to this day, I think where I was going is, the deeper I get into this process, the thinner and thinner that illusion becomes. You know?
Yeah. I think the feeling is still, it's so hardwired at this point, like the need for, whether it's validation or the need for something, is probably still there, but you're realizing in the moment, okay, this isn't how I get the need met.
Yeah, exactly. And how futile that process is, you know, and where it leads to, which is inevitably, for me, just absolute despair and hopelessness. And I'll have weeks that will go by where I will get attached to something. You know, for me, being new in the field of psychology, I think the first thing that really grabbed me was, I have to sound like a therapist. I have to use the lingo. I've got to know these modalities. I've got to pick a modality, you know, and really attaching to this concept of, I have to be something other than what I am, right? And, you know, I look at spirituality and these spiritual texts, one of the spiritual texts being the Bible, right? I'm not a religious person by any means anymore. Grew up Orthodox Christian, I would say. Not Orthodox Christian, non-denominational Christian. And one of the verses in the Bible is, you shall have no other gods before me, right? That's one of the 10 commandments, I believe, right? And I see that as a very metaphorical representation of that commandment, you know? For me, what this process is, what God is to me, is now life. It's synonymous with life, God's will, right? Allowing that water to flow, right? In the way that it wants to flow, in the image of the Creator, whatever you want to say. I think these are all, on some level, symbols or metaphors for allowing life to do its thing. And so when I get attached to those idols, or having the God before what I really feel on that deep spiritual level as God for me now, inevitably it ends in destruction. It ends in a lesson learned the hard way,
And at this point, you have that macro view of like, it's going to lead to this place. It's going to lead to destruction. In the micro, in the day-to-day, when you feel an urge towards some sort of relief, how do you manage that? And I ask that because so many of the addicts that I see, they have that understanding from a long-term point of view. They know it's going to hurt them.
Sure, yeah.
But the pain in the short term is so overwhelming. How do you get through that? How did you get through that when it was more prevalent in your life? Like, how did you, once you had that awakening, how did you manage, or even now, how do you continue to manage those short-term moments of extreme discomfort or misery without your coping skills that you used to use through substances?
Yeah. Well, I think the beautiful thing about my journey, and the most personal thing for me, has been discovering meditation. I really feel like meditation is such a diluted, with a T, word these days.
Agreed.
Mindfulness. Agreed. Oh, it's mindfulness, and we're just going to take some deep breaths, and we're going to calm ourselves. And yeah, of course, in the moment, those things can be helpful. But I think if anybody really were to discover what can be attained through those practices, and they really are spiritual practices, I feel like everybody would be meditating. I feel like we would be teaching this in schools. I feel like this is the fountain of youth in a lot of ways.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like this constantly renewable source of just life, right? For instance, sitting and letting every bit of you go, all of your identity. I'm not a son. I'm not a father. I'm not my past. I'm not my future. I'm not, I don't have a gender. I'm just here. I am, right? I am pure being. And sitting in that, returning to that space, I feel on some level has shown me what life really is on a fundamental level. And I think being able to witness that again and again and again, that's where life happens, right? That place. Being able to detach in some way, right? And it sounds radical. I know it sounds radical maybe it will to a lot of people, but being able to detach from this idea that I am the sum of all of this work that I've done. Well, what happens when all that work fucking crumbles? I am my marriage, and I am a proud police officer. Well, what happens when you lose your career over a stupid mistake? Like, who are you then? And I think seeing that on a deep level, for me, has become my drug. It's like this seeking of something so profoundly simple and so profoundly fundamental that it's almost indescribable.
Yeah. When did you start meditating? Within your journey, at what point did that come to you as a tool that you could use?
Yeah. Shortly after I walked away from this career, I found a book called The Power of Now. And, the book itself, I don't think is important. It's seen in a lot of circles as very new agey and kind of uses a sense of like spiritual bypass. And there are a lot of people who take this book and I think use it for in a way that maybe it wasn't intended to be used. But that was the book that showed me on some deep level that I am not even my thoughts, that these thoughts that I was thinking, you know, I have OCD. I was diagnosed with OCD a couple years ago, and it made so much sense to me when I got that diagnosis, when I got that validation that, oh my God, all of these intrusive thoughts that I had been thinking, all of this stuff, it was not me. There was no me that was controlling this process. And that decoupling of agency or responsibility was just such a profound thing for me to witness.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. It takes the shame out of it.
Yeah.
I'm just processing a
Sure.
lot of what you said.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I'm processing still. You know, this happened, almost 5 years ago now, right? And this process has been one of, you know, just a slow and gradual sort of almost forensic analysis of what the fuck happened to me, dude? What happened that shifted me so radically that it changed my relationship with life itself, you know?
Yeah. You know, you're one of only 2 people that I've ever heard describe it in that way. And I'm envious of such a profound realization or epiphany. It's like I've had some of my own, but they've been gradual, which is great. I'm glad I gained insight. But the one other person I've heard it describe it like that described it very similarly, almost like a spiritual, but almost a religious experience of just something else driving you.
Yeah.
And similar in the sense where it gave this other person peace.
Yeah.
In a particular way. And I'm envious of that peace, that inner peace that comes with that. It's a journey, and I've personally gained more than I used to have, but to see someone that's so comfortable in their own skin and have that inner peace and realization that they're just truly own who they are. I think it's admirable to see. I think I hadn't even heard you describe it that way before. I think that's why I'm trying to process, because that's the first time I've heard it from you. And I think, I mean, it explains a lot of why you are the way you are.
Yeah. You know, it's definitely not something you bring up at parties. But that being said, I was like a soldier for God when this thing first happened, because it was so profound. I really thought I was losing my shit. I really thought that, you know, and in came the shame. Back came this flood of shame, and this, maybe it was all just delusion. Maybe I'm bipolar. Maybe I'm, you know. And I feel like, an unpopular opinion maybe, but I feel like there are for sure cases of, you know, mental illness and people who are sort of relegated to these diagnoses, who had these massive spiritual, religious experiences that, you know, modern day science, modernity does not really accept. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's been something that I think like I said, I've been processing myself for years, and with that process has come stability. With that process has come direction, you know? a lot of things. And like I said, I still feel the old paradigm. It's still there.
Yeah.
You know, very much so in some respects, you know.
But you have the awareness
Yeah.
around it.
Yeah. I think it is so painful now for me to be inauthentic. Once I've tasted that truth, it is so painful that it's almost not worth it. It's not worthwhile. You know what I mean?
I think back to the movie, I think it was Flight with Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
Where at the very end, all he has to do is just lie one more time.
Yeah.
To save his career.
Yeah.
To say, oh, I wasn't, you know, I wasn't, I think he was high or drunk or something when the accident happened in that movie. But he said, all I had to do was lie one more time and I'd be scot-free. I'd be fine. And he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
He couldn't do one more lie. He couldn't live one more day like that.
Right.
And that's the most peaceful he became.
Yeah. Because it really is the surrender of everything.
Surrender.
Of everything.
Yeah.
You know, everything that you had to be. You know, you see it, I think, when criminals are finally, when they give up, you know, and you just see this sort of sense of relief come over them, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, what about your blind spots?
Sure.
In the sense of, are there more layers to this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, if this journey has shown me anything, it's that the minute I think that I'm in charge, the minute I think I know what I'm fucking doing, like I said, in comes that bitch slap, you know, and it's School of Hard Knocks all over again. But the redemption is different, man. It's like I am renewed with every stumble that I make. And it's not a place of shame. It's not a place of, you know, I'm just unworthy. It's like this realization that, you know, it's like the lost, the strayed lamb. You know what I mean? And
it's this place of exploration for you to continue to explore.
100%, you know? And I do that, you know, and being in this field, I think specifically is just a testament to, the work is never done. The work is never done. And it's just this renewal process, I think, and searching.
But you approach it at this point probably not from a place of shame. Like, I need to not go there. But it's, oh, if I explore this, I will get closer to what I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah. And in that sense, there's almost like this radicalized excitement or sort of sense of adventure to,
I could relate to that.
You know what I mean? To shaving off these layers of hardened, calloused me and saying, what's driving this, man? What is this? Because if it comes from a place of fear, if it comes from a place of lack, it is not me. And that realization, I think, continues to drive you, continues to cause this exploration.
Yeah. But approaching it from a point of view of curiosity.
Sure.
And like trying to get closer to your true identity and continuing on that journey.
Yeah.
Instead of, I mean, it'd be easier to just turn yourself away from that and just be like, nah, I'm good. I'm good. It's too shameful to look at some of these deeper layers.
Sure.
Let me just be content with where I'm at.
Yeah.
But approaching it with curiosity and adventure, it's like the reward is worth it.
Oh man. Yeah. Like nothing I've ever felt, you know? And I hear what you're saying. And on some level, I think I agree that, you know, maybe it would be easier, but on another level, you know, in this new paradigm, it's almost like that's not a fucking option anymore.
Yeah.
In a very tangible sense, that is no longer an option for me. So this process, which has been immensely painful, continues. It's like this refinement, you know, this distillation of this avatar, this thing that I am, you know, and burning away, you know, process of distillation, the process of refinement, is by its very nature painful, right? That pain is itself, something that's underneath that, man, underneath those layers that needs to be peeled open. And it's messy and it's ugly at times. And it's, but it's, I've never known a peace like this, man. Never in my life.
I'm happy for you.
Thanks,
I'm happy
dude.
for you. I'm happy that you found this part of yourself. I'm happy that you can live more freely. I'm happy that you have stepped into that.
Yeah.
I think we've said it before, but it's like if more people could like join, come to the light, see what it's like on this side. It doesn't have to be shameful or, playing a character. It's like if you just lean into, if you let go, if you just let life do its thing, if you pour the water down the plant, like it leads to peace.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Peace. And what I think is 10 times the man that I ever was, I created a projection or a model of what I thought a man was. You know what I mean? But it was never anything more than just a fucking shell. It was a veneer, man.
Yeah.
And there's never, ever been any truth to anything that I built, because it was fucking paper thin. And as soon as it crumbled,
It's a house of cards anyway.
House of cards, And so I think the misconception is like, well, who would I become if I let go?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the fear really is this pompous idea that I'm controlling all of this. And it's just so misplaced and misguided, man, and it's like, I never would have imagined that I'd be becoming a therapist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Never would have imagined. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's bizarre and it's like magical in some weird sense,
Yeah. But it's authentic. It's
man.
It's an honor to know you and to connect the way that we do.
Thank you, man. I feel the same.
It's
Very
an
much the
absolute
same.
privilege.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your journey.
Yeah.